I walked up the porch steps slowly, the weight of my 76 years pressing down with every creak and groan of my joints. It wasn't something you could ignore. Time had a way of making itself known. The mailbox gave a tired squeak as I opened its door, revealing the usual stack of bills and advertisements. But then, something else caught my eye: a cream-colored envelope with my sister-in-law, Lizzie's fancy handwriting on the front. I stared at it for a long moment, unsure whether to open it. The last time Lizzie had taken the time to handwrite anything to me was a decade ago, at least. I walked back inside, the familiar, quiet emptiness of my little house in Bowers settling around me. The walls felt heavy with memories, but there was no one left to share them with. I sank into my favorite old chair by the window, the cushions sagging from years of use. With careful fingers, I unsealed the envelope, unsure of what I'd find inside. Dear Rosalind, you are invited to a celebratory dinner in honor of Rebecca's 15th birthday on Saturday at 7 p.m. I read the note over and over, as if the words would suddenly change into something warmer, something more personal. But they didn't. There was no warmth in the invitation, just a formality. And yet, it was still an invitation, the first one I'd received in a long time. Neville, my son, and his wife Lizzie lived just 20 minutes away in their sleek, modern house. A house with windows that seemed to go on forever, and a garden that was manicured to perfection. It had been a place I visited every week, back when my hands were always full with the children. I helped with everything: diapers, bottles, and rocking the babies to sleep. I was always there for them, doing what I could to make their lives easier. But that was before everything changed. At first, it was subtle. The phone calls grew less frequent. "Sorry, Mom, we can't make it today," Neville would say. "We've got too much going on." Then came the family dinners, canceled one by one. "We're going to spend Christmas with just our family this year," they told me. As if I wasn't part of it, I stood up, walking slowly over to the dresser, where the old family pictures still stood. There was Neville as a baby, his face round and full of mischief, his freckles scattered across his nose, and that missing front tooth that had always made him look so charming. My only child, the one I had raised alone after Roy, my husband, was taken from me in a car accident when Neville was just 9. I had given up my own dreams, worked long hours, and made countless sacrifices so that my son could have a future. And he did. He became an engineer, married Lizzie, a woman from a good family, and they built a life together, one I had helped them create, at least in the beginning. Rebecca was born first, and then came Christopher, 3 years later. I helped raise them both. I had been there, night after night, rocking Rebecca to sleep while Neville and Lizzie tried to catch some rest. I had picked the children up from daycare, made them dinner, and sung lullabies when they couldn't fall asleep. Lizzie had always welcomed me then. It seemed like there was always room for me in their lives, but that all changed when Christopher turned 5. Neville got a big promotion. Lizzie landed a job at a real estate agency. They started meeting new people, making new friends, and living the kind of life they had always dreamed of. And I faded into the background. I was just the old woman with simple habits, someone who didn't quite fit in anymore. "Mom, please don't wear that old sweater," Neville would say, his nose scrunching in disapproval whenever I showed up at their house. "We don't eat fried food anymore," Lizzie would say, coldly pushing away the plate of pie I had brought. For them, it wasn't like this when Neville was a child. He had always been a dreamer, always thinking about a big house, a fancy car, a prestigious job. I had encouraged him to dream big, to do better than me. And he did. He succeeded, and I remained just who I always was, a woman who worked hard, who struggled, and who never let go of her roots. Lizzie, on the other hand, had always looked down on me. She came from a family of well-educated teachers, and she couldn't hide the disdain in her eyes whenever I mispronounced a word or used the wrong fork at the table. At first, she tolerated me because of Neville, but once the children grew up, and once my help was no longer needed, I became a burden. I thought about all the things I had done for them. How many nights had I spent holding Rebecca, rocking her to sleep? How many times had I stayed late, helping Neville with his homework, or caring for Christopher when Lizzie had to work? But then, things started to shift. The children stopped coming to me for hugs. Rebecca rolled her eyes when I asked how school was. Christopher hardly looked up from his phone when I came around. The turning point came last year, at Thanksgiving. I had cooked the turkey, like I always did. I showed up early, ready to help with the meal, But when the door opened, it wasn't Lizzie who greeted MIT, was a stranger. "Who are you?" I asked, confused. "I'm Laura Nightingale, from Gourmet Taste Catering, and you are?" "I'm Rosalind Caro, Neville's mother," I replied, my voice trembling. Laura looked at me, clearly confused. I wasn't told anything about an assistant. At that moment, Lizzie appeared, flawless in her beige suit, perfectly styled. "Rosalind, you're early," she said, a faint smile on her lips. "We were going to call you. This year, we decided to have the dinner catered. We've got guests from Neville's firm." There I stood, holding a turkey, feeling like a fool. The Thanksgiving I had always prepared for them had been replaced with something different. Since then, invitations had become rare. The big holidays, sure, but even then, not always. I tried calling, asking what was wrong. "Mom, you're being dramatic," Neville told me. "We're just busy. We have our own lives now." I looked at the picture on the dresser, remembering when this same man, now 42, had climbed into my lap after a nightmare, how I had kissed his scraped knees, how I had stayed up late with him, helping with his schoolwork. When had everything changed? It didn't take long to notice the signs of their financial struggles. They had taken out loans for renovations, new cars, and vacations. Lizzie was always buying things, like she was trying to prove something. I offered to help, just a little bit from the savings I had. It wasn't much, but it might make a difference. But Neville refused. "I can take care of my family," he said, his voice full of pride. A month later, I found out he had taken out another loan. I thought about the homemade sweaters I had given to the grandchildren 2 Christmases ago. Lizzie had made sure to comment, "Thank your grandmother for these interesting gifts," as if I had handed them a pile of rags. A week later, I saw the sweaters in a donation bin. It was clear that I was no longer needed, not the way I once had been. 6 months ago, I had gone to Christopher's birthday party. I sat in the corner of their living room, ignored by everyone, a forgotten relic of a life that no longer had a place in their world. And now, this invitation. What did it mean? Could it be a sign that Neville and Lizzie had finally realized how they had hurt me? Could this be an opportunity to fix things, to try and reconnect with the family I had always been there for? I stood in front of the hallway mirror, staring at my reflection. Gray hair, wrinkles, old-fashioned glasses. I was just an old woman now. But then I remembered. It was Rebecca's birthday. She was 15. That was important. Despite everything, I loved her. I remembered holding her as a baby, teaching her to speak, reading her stories at night. She was so sensitive, so kind. I remembered when she was 7, asking me about her grandpa Roy, the man she would never know. Grandma, was Grandpa kind? She had asked me. The kindest man I ever knew, I told her, my voice trembling. Where had that kindness gone? Now, at 15, Rebecca was a replica of her mother, cold, distant, and dismissive of me. Even Christopher, who used to ask 1,000 questions, barely looked up from his phone to say hello. The decision was made. I was going to that dinner. It could be my last chance to make things right. But what should I wear? My closet was full of old clothes, nothing fancy or fashionable. I dug through my small collection, finally choosing a dark blue dress with a white collar. It was a little old-fashioned, but neat and clean, and it would do. I was going. I had to go. I'd prepared a gift for Rebecca in advance. It was an antique silver mirror I'd gotten from my grandmother, the only thing of value I had. I polished it to a shine, packed it in a beautiful box, antied it with a ribbon. The day before dinner, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I was tormented by doubts. Why had they called me in after so many months of ignoring me? What would I say to Neville? How would I behave with Lizzie? What if they just wanted to humiliate me once again? I got up early this morning, even though dinner was scheduled for 7 o'clock in the evening. I'd been getting ready all day. I'd showered, styled my hair, even applied some makeup, a faded rosa-colored lipstick, and some blush. All this preparation reminded me of how I used to get ready for dates with Roy. He always said I was beautiful, even when I didn't have time to comb my hair after the night shift. What would Roy say if he saw the way his son treated me? Roy was a kind man without arrogance. Even though he had a good education, he was never ashamed of me. On the contrary, he was proud of how strong and hardworking I was. If he were alive, maybe things would have turned out differently. Maybe Neville wouldn't have grown up so cold. Our house was always full of love while Roy was alive. We weren't rich, but we had enough. Neville was a happy child, surrounded by care. After Roy died, things changed. I started working more, often, leaving Neville alone. He grew up fast, too fast. He became withdrawn, serious, even as a teenager. He talked about being successful and rich so we'd never have to save money again. In a way, I understood him. Poverty frightened him just as it frightened me. But for me, it was about relationships, family, love, and Neville. It was as if he decided that money and status were more important than anything else. Maybe it was my fault. I used to complain about not having enough money, about being tired. Maybe I made him think our life wasn't good enough. I knew Lizzie before she started dating Neville. She worked at the same school as her little sister. Even then, Lizzie was ambitious and driven. She wanted more than what their teaching family could give her. Neville was her chance for a better life. A smart, successful young engineer with prospects, they fit together like two pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, both striving upwards, both wanting status and recognition. And me, I was just a reminder of where Neville had come from, of the past he was so eager to leave behind. I remembered our last major fight. It had been 3 years ago when it casually mentioned in front of one of his co-workers that Neville had dreamed of being an astronomer as uncle, but we couldn't afford a telescope. "Mom," Neville hissed, when the guest left. "Why do you tell such things? It's of no interest to anyone." "I was just proud of you," I replied, confused. "You were always such a smart, inquisitive boy." "I haven't been a boy in 30 years, he cut me off, "and I'd rather you didn't make us look like poor losers." "We weren't losers," I countered, hurt. "We were a happy family no matter what." Neville laughed bitterly. "Happy, Mom? I never had a proper vacation. I worked. All my friends went to summer camps and I worked part-time as a paperboy. I did the best I could." My voice shook. "I know," he sighed, softening a little. "But the past is in the past. I've made a new life, and I'd rather not rake up old stories." After that conversation, something finally snapped between us. Neville called me even less often, invited me out even less, and I was afraid to say the wrong thing, to hurt him, to remind him of the things he wanted to forget. By 6 p.m., I was all set. The cab was booked for 7. The drive to Neville's house would take about 15 minutes, but I preferred to bather a little earlier. It was a habit from when I'd worked at the supermarket. Even 5 minutes late was a reprimand. As I waited for the cab, I was once again plagued by doubts. What if this invitation had been sent by mistake? What if they were disappointed to see me on their doorstep? What if I did something wrong again, said the wrong thing, and that would be the last straw? I glanced at my phone. Maybe I should make sure the invitation was still open, but then I dismissed the thought. No, it would look pathetic, like I was begging for attention. If they really want to see me, I'll come, and if they don't, well, at least I'll know for sure. The cab arrived on time. The driver, an older man, about my age, politely opened the door for me. All the way there, he tried to make conversation, asking where I was going. "So dressed up." "To my son's house for a family dinner," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "Oh, that's wonderful," the driver smiled. "Family is the most important thing we have," I nodded, unable to answer. Yes, family was the most important thing. Except, was I still part of Neville's family? My son's house appeared in the distance. Big, modern, with perfectly trimmed bushes out front. The kind of house I'd only seen in magazines or on TV. Neville had really achieved a lot, but at what cost? Cab stopped at the gate. I paid, leaving a generous tip, one of the few luxuries I could afford. The driver wished me a good evening. If only had known. There were several cars in the driveway, so the guests were already starting to gather. I took a deep breath and headed for the front door. With each step, my heart was pounding harder and harder. I felt like a child before an important exam. Fear, uncertainty, the urge to turn back, but I kept going for Rebecca, for the last hope of reconciliation. The front door was ajar. From inside came voices, laughter, music. I paused on the threshold, gathering my wits. Then I raised my hand and pressed the bell. The sound rang loud and sharp, as if announcing the arrival of an intruder. For a moment, the voices inside were silent. Then footsteps were heard. The door swung open, and Neville stood before me. My son looked so handsome in his dark suit. He had always looked like his father. The same dark eyes, the same well-defined chin, only there was always warmth in his father's eyes. And Neville's eyes now looked with wonder and anxiety. Mom, he looked as if I'd seen a ghost. You came. Those two words, spoken with such obvious surprise, told me more than a whole conversation. They weren't expecting me. They didn't think I'd come. The invitation had been an empty formality, sent perhaps under pressure from Rebecca, or just to clear my conscience. And yet there I was, standing on their doorstep with a gift in my hand and a hope in my heart that was melting away with each passing second. You invited me. I tried to smile, but my lips wouldn't do it. Happy birthday to Rebecca. Neville stepped aside, letting me into the house. His movements were stiff, as if he were performing an unpleasant duty. Come in, he said dryly. The guests are already gathering. I stepped across the threshold, feeling my heart clench. The hallway was shining clean. The marble floor, the designer console against fuel, the huge silver-framed mirror, everything spotless, everything in its place. How far it was from my humble home, with worn carpets and old furniture. I brought a present for Rebecca, I said, holding out a neatly wrapped box. Neville took it without even looking at it. Good. I'll give it to her. I'd like to do it myself. She's busy with her friends right now. Maybe later. There were voices and laughter coming from the living room. I took a step in that direction, but Neville stopped me with a hand on my shoulder. Mom, before we join the others, he hesitated, searching for words. There will be important people there, colleagues, business partners. Please bear us restraint. I felt the color flood my cheeks. What do you mean? You know, he avoided looking me in the eye. Don't tell your stories about the past, and don't ask people about personal things. It can be awkward. I pressed my lips together, trying not to show how much his words hurt me. Neville was already embarrassed of me, and I hadn't even had a chance to open my mouth. Okay, I replied quietly. I'll sit as quiet as a mouse. Neville sighed. I didn't mean I'd like that. It's an important night for us, for Rebecca. He turned and headed for the living room. I had no choice but to follow him. The living room was full of people. I recognized Liza's parents. They were standing by the fireplace talking to some elegant couple. Mr. and Mrs. Chase had always seemed haughty to me. They taught at a private school and considered themselves the intellectual elite. They spoke to me condescendingly, as if I were a child, or not very smart. Lizzie noticed us and hurried over to meet us. She looked flawless in her cream dress, with perfect hair and makeup. Rosalind, her smile did touch her eyes. How nice of you to be able to come. She hugged me, a cold, formal embrace that ended before I could respond. Where's Rebecca? I asked, looking around. I wanted to congratulate her. She's still getting ready, Lizzie replied. You know how it is with teenage girls. Everything has to be perfect. Lizzie turned to Neville. Darling, Richard wanted to talk to you about that project. He's at the bar. Neville nodded and, without a word to me, walked away. Lizzie was about to follow him, but I stopped her. Lizzie, thank you for inviting me. I thought you'd forgotten about me. Her smile became strained. Oh, not at all, Rosalind. We're just very busy. You realize work, children, social obligations. Of course, I nodded. I understand. It's just that sometimes I feel like superfluous. Lizzie looked embarrassed for a moment, but quickly pulled herself together. Don't be silly. You're family. It's just that we have different interests. She glanced at my modest dress. By the way, do you want something to drink? Champagne? Wine? Wine would be nice, I agreed. Great. Wait here. I'll get it. Lizzie left, leaving me alone in the middle of the living room. I felt uncomfortable under the stares off strangers. Some of them looked at me with curiosity, others with barely concealed disdain. I was a stranger at this celebration of life, determined to find a quiet corner. I headed toward the far end of the room, where a few chairs stood. On the way, I heard a scrap of conversation. Is that Neville's mother? A woman in an expensive suit asked. She looked so plain. She was a cleaning lady or something. The man answered, lowering his voice. Neville had worked his way up from the bottom. Amazing, isn't it? I quickened my steps, pretending I hadn't heard. When I reached the chair, I sat down, trying to make myself as inconspicuous as possible. Lizzie returned with a glass offered wine. Here you go. It's not the most expensive, but I think you'll like it. I took the glass, trying not to show how much her words hurt me. Not the most expensive, as if I didn't deserve better. Thank you, I said, taking a small sip. It was delicious. Lizzie took a seat next to me, clearly feeling the need to keep up the polite conversation. How are you doing, Rosalind? Are you well? Yes, I'm fine. I tried to smile. It's a little lonely, but I'm getting by. Maybe you should get a hobby, Lizzie suggested, with fake concern. Or, meet other people your age. There's a senior center in Bowers, I heard. Senior center. It was like I had one foot in the grave. I have activities, I replied coolly. I help out at the local library. I read to the children. Oh, that's nice. Lizzie Waskler-Lee, not interested. Her gaze wandered around the room, searching for more important guests. At that moment, Rebecca entered the living room. My granddaughter looked stunning in her light pink dress, so grown up, so beautiful. Not at all, the little girl who once sat on my lap and asked me to tell a story. Everyone applauded. Lizzie immediately jumped up and hurried to her daughter, leaving me alone. I watched Rebecca accept congratulations, hugging your friends, posing for pictures. I wanted to go over and hug her and tell her how proud I was of the person she had grown up to be, but something held me back. The fear of rejection, the fear of seeing the same disdain in her eyes as in her parents'. Finally, I gathered my courage and stood up. Making my way through the crowd of guests, I approached Rebecca. She spotted me when I was very close. Her eyes flashed with something like joy for a moment, but then they turned wary. "Grandmother," she said, letting me put my arms around her. "You came." "Of course I came," I smiled, pulling away. "I wouldn't have missed your birthday for anything. 15 years is a big date." "Yeah, I guess so." Rebecca looked back at her friends who were watching us curiously. "I have a present for you," I said. "Your father was supposed to give it to." "Yeah." Rebecca was clearly uncomfortable. Thank you. I'll look at it later." "Okay, we're going to take a group photo now." She walked away without waiting for my response. I was left standing alone with a smile frozen on my face. "Don't take it personally," came a voice from beside me. "Teenagers are so selfish." I turned around. Standing next to me was an older woman, about my age, with kind eyes and gray hair arranged in an elegant style. "I'm Nora," she introduced herself. "Aunt Lizzie, and you must be Neville's mother." "Rosalind," I held out my hand. "It's nice to meet you." "Likewise," Nora smiled. "I feel a little out of place here, too. Too many young people. Too much talk about things I don't understand." I was relieved to have found a kindred spirit. "I know what you mean. Sometimes I feel like I'm speaking another language." We had a little chat with Nora. It turned out she was a widow like me, and lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Bowers. We found a lot in common, and even exchanged phone numbers, agreeing to meet up sometime. Our conversation was interrupted by Neville announcing that it was time to get to the table. The guests began to move into the dining room. I followed them, but Neville intercepted me. "Mom, you sit over there." He pointed to the far end of the table next to Aunt Nora. I nodded, grateful to at least be sitting next to someone nice, but it was still a shame that I was seated so far from the center, where Neville, Lizzie, and Rebecca were seated. The dinner was exquisite. Several course changes, expensive wines, impeccable service. I felt uncomfortable with all the different sizes of forks and knives, not always knowing what was for what. Nora, noticing my confusion, quietly prompted me. The conversation at the table revolved around work, travel, politics. I kept silent, realizing that I had nothing to add to the discussion of resorts in the Maldives or the latest trends in the stock market. At one point, Lizzie, who was sitting far enough away from me, but still within earshot, started talking about her last visit to our stylist. "He works wonders. Seriously," she said. "Even the masterpiece looks can be transformed." She cast an expressive glance in my direction. A few of the guests followed her gaze and grinned. I pretended not to notice and continued eating. "Speaking of transformations," Lizzie continued in a louder voice, clearly wanting me to hear. "You know what the worst thing is? When people don't realize that their style is 30 years out of date. Walking around in those awful dresses with collars like schoolgirls." I froze looking at my plate. My dress was exactly like that with a white collar. "Lizzie," Neville said quietly, but she just laughed. "What?" I wasn't referring to anyone in particular, but everyone knew it wasn't true. I could feel my cheeks burning with shame. Nora touched me arm sympathetically. "Don't mind her," she whispered. She'd always been a snob. I tried to smile, but my lips wouldn't do it. What had I done to Lizzie? Why was she so intent on humiliating me? After the main course dessert was served, an exquisite cake with 15 candles, everyone sang happy birthday. I sang too, looking at my granddaughter, who was glowing with happiness. If only she had looked in my direction, she would have seen how proud I was of her. But Rebecca didn't look. She was preoccupied with her friends, her parents, her presence. I was just a figure on the periphery of her life, an insignificant detail to be forgotten. After the cake, the guests began to move back into the living room for coffee and drinks. I followed them, still hoping to find a moment to have a proper conversation with my granddaughter. In the living room, I saw Rebecca opening presents surrounded by her friends. A tight circle had formed around her, and it was impossible for me to get through. I watched from afar as she admired each gift as she hugged the givers. My gift was not one of them. Looking for your granddaughter? Nora asked, approaching me with a cup of coffee. Yes, I sighed. I wish I could talk to her, but she's so busy. Young people, Nora shook her head. Always in a hurry to get somewhere, always surrounded by the same young and noisy. They rarely have a time for us old people. You're right. I smiled sadly, but I understand her. When I was her age, I wasn't much interested in talking to my grandmother either. And yet, Nora frowned, there was more respect for elders in our time. These kids, they think the world revolves around them. I didn't answer. What could I say? That the world was indeed changing, and not always for the better. That the new generation had grown up with different values, where respect for elders wasn't a priority. At that moment, I noticed Lizzie having an animated conversation with some woman, glancing in my direction every now and then. They were both laughing, and I couldn't help but feel that they were laughing at me. Don't mind her, Nora said, noticing me glance. Lizzie has always been like that. She likes to feel superior. What have I done to her? I asked quietly. Why, does she dislike me so much? Nora shrugged. Perhaps she sees you as a threat. Mothers are often jealous of their mothers-in-law, thinking they are trying to influence their husbands or children. But I've never interfered in their lives, I objected. I've always tried to help without being intrusive. It's not about what you do or don't do, Nora said softly. It's about how Chas sees it. Lizzie, she'd always wanted to be the center of attention, to be in complete control. And you're a reminder that Neville had a life before her, that he loved someone else before her. He thought about what she said. Maybe there was some truth to them, but it didn't explain why Neville let his wife treat him like that, why he was so cold and distant himself. At that moment, Lizzie laughed loudly, drawing everyone's attention. She was standing in the center of the room, holding a photograph of some kind. Me God, look at this, she exclaimed. Neville, I didn't know you wore such horrible glasses. The guests got the read round her, looking at the picture and laughing. I tensed, recognizing an old family album I had once left at there. What's that dress? Lizzie continued, flipping through the pages. It looks like it was sewn from Aquitaine. I stood up and walked towards her, feeling anger building up inside. These were my memories, my life, that she was making a mockery of. Lizzie, I said as I approached the group. This is my scrapbook. She looked at me with feigned surprise. Oh, Rosalind, I was just showing the guest how cute Neville was when he was a baby. Look at this adorable picture. She held out the album to me, open to a picture of Neville and me standing in front of our old house. I was in a simple chintz dress, he and wearing jeans and thick-rimmed glasses. Yeah, I picked up the album. It was before his high school graduation. So, interesting outfits. Lizzie smiled, but her eyes remained cold. 7 South fashion, huh? We couldn't afford fancy things, I answered bluntly. But we were happy. Lizzie looked a little embarrassed by my bluntness, but quickly pulled herself together. Of course, it's not how you look, it's how you feel. She said with such fake sincerity that I could barely keep from rolling my eyes. Exactly. I closed the album. Thank you for keeping it. Actually, I found it in the attic when we were cleaning. Lizzie said, I was going to throw it away, but he thought you might be interested in looking at it. It brings back so many memories, doesn't it? Throw it away. She wanted to throw away the memories of Neville's childhood, of our lives, like it was garbage that needed to be gotten rid of. Yeah. I clutched the album in my hands. Thanks for not throwing it away. Lizzie smiled and turned to the guests. Who wants more champagne? We have a lovely vintage we brought back from France last year. The guests followed her, momentarily, forgetting about the old photos in me. I was left standing there with the album in my hands, feeling as if I'd been kicked under the breath. Neville came over to me looking embarrassed. I'm sorry about that, he said quietly. Lizzie didn't mean to hurt you, did she? I looked into his eyes. I think that's exactly what she wanted. Neville sighed. Mom, don't start. It's Rebecca's night. Let's not make a scene. I stared at him, not believing my ears. His wife had just publicly humiliated me, made a mockery of our past life, and he was worried about me not making a scene. I've never made a scene, Neville, I said quietly. All my life I've been quietly tolerant. When your father died and we had to cut back on everything, I didn't complain. When I had to work 16 hours a day so you could go to a good school, I didn't complain. When people looked down on me because of my job, my clothes, my accent, I didn't complain. Neville looked like he was in physical pain listening to this. Mom, please. But now, I continued, not letting him interrupt me. Now that your wife is openly mocking me, our life, everything we've been through, are you afraid I'll make a scene? Lizzie didn't mean anything bad, Neville said quietly, looking around to make sure no one could hear. She's different, you know. She grew up in a different environment, and that justifies her behavior. Thatch is different. I shook my head. Neville, when did you become so? My son looked annoyed. I'm not indifferent. I just don't want to make a big deal out of it. Lizzie showed some old photos, made fun of the fashions of the day. What's so terrible about that? It's not about the pictures, Neville. I tried to get through to him. It's about respect. The way she treats me, the way she talks to me, the way she looks at me like I'm some sort of loser that I'm ashamed to show my friends. Neville ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd done since childhood, when he was nervous or angry. Mom, this isn't the time or place for this conversation. Please, let's just enjoy tonight. Okay, enjoy. How could I enjoy an evening where I was constantly humiliated and ignored? Where my own son was ashamed of me, but I could see it was useless toward. Neville had already taken Liz's side, as he had always done in recent years. All right, I said, giving up. I'll enjoy the evening. Neville looked relieved. Thank you. I'm going to go check on Rebecca. He walked away, leaving me alone with the album in my hands. I flipped through a few pages, looking at the pictures of our past lives. Neville on the bike I bought him for Christmas, working overtime for a month. Neville at graduation, so proud in his rented suit. Neville getting his college diploma, the first in our family to earn a college degree. We've come such a long way, overcame so many hardships. And now he stood there, among the rich and successful, ashamed of his roots, ashamed of me. I closed the album and clutched it to my chest. These were my memories, my life, the only thing I had left. The evening content. The guests laughed, talked, drank expensive champagne. I sat in Thekkener watching it all as an outsider. Nora occasionally joined me, but most of the time I was alone. Lizzie continued to play the part of the perfect hostess. She flitted from one guest to another, laughing, keeping the conversation. Occasionally, she glanced in my direction, and each time I saw the same thing in her eyes, contempt mixed with irritation at my presence. Rebecca never came up to me. She was too busy with her friends, her gifts, her life, in which there was no room for Grandma. I began to wonder why I had come at all, why I put myself through this humiliation. No one here was happy to see me. No one needed my presence. As the evening wore on, I felt more and more alone every minute, surrounded by these noisy, cheerful people. It was as if they existed in some other dimension, the dimension of expensive suits, traveling to exotic countries, and talking about things I had no idea about. I was still sitting in my corner, holding my family album, looking through the old photos. It tried to figure out at what point everything went wrong, at what point my son, my little Neville, had turned into this cold, indifferent man who was ashamed of his mother. Rosalind, are y'all right? Nora reappeared beside me. You look upset. I'm fine. I tried Tosmal. I'm just a little tired. Parties like this are exhausting at my age. Nora nodded understandingly. I know what you mean. After 10 o'clock at night, I'm usually in bed with a book, not at a social gathering. We both laughed quietly, finding comfort in this small companionship. At that moment, Lizzie entered the drawing room again. She was holding a box of some kind, and her face lit up with that peculiar smile that only appeared on her face when she was about to do something unpleasant. Attention everyone. Lizzie raised her voice, and the chatter died down. I have a very special surprise for our dear Rebecca. It's a family heirloom that has been passed down in our family for generations. I tensed as I saw Lizzie ceremoniously open the box and pull out a dainty silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. It's my great-grandmother's necklace, Lizzie continued, looking at impressed guests. It was passed down through the female line to her eldest daughter on her 15th birthday. And today, I am proud to pass it on to you, Rebecca. Rebecca approached her mother, her eyes shining with delight. Lizzie clasped the necklace around her daughter's neck, and everyone applauded. I sat frozen with shock. It was cruel, even for Lizzie to so defiantly emphasize that family traditions and heritage were important to her, but only her own. My gift for Rebecca, my grandmother's silver mirror, was never given to her. It was a family heirloom, too. The only valuable thing I had. Neville walked over to his wife and daughter, hugging them both. They stood there, the perfectively posing, for the pictures the guests were taking without me. It was like I didn't exist. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't sit there any longer, pretending everything was okay. I stood up, holding the album tightly, and headed for the exit. I needed fresh air, needed to get away from this humiliation for a little while. As I passed a group of guests, I heard one oft women say, "Who is that old lady? I've seen her here all evening, but she doesn't talk to anyone." "That's Neville's," answered a man's voice. "He rarely mentions her. They don't seem to be very close." I quickened my pace, tears welling up in my eyes. Not very close. What delicate wording for what had happened between us. My own son had cut me out of his life, and everyone knew it. I walked out into the hallway, intending to find a private place to gather my thoughts. But there I ran into who was escorting a guest out. Rosalind. She looked at me with feigned concern. "Are you leaving already?" "No," I shook my head. "I just wanted to get some rest. Lots of people. It's noisy." "Of course." Lizzie smiled her fake smile. "At your age, such events must be exhausting. Maybe you should go home. I can call a cab." Even now, even after all her barbs and humiliations, she kept trying to get rid of me. "I'm fine," I reapplied firmly. "I want to stay for my granddaughter's birthday party." Lizzie pressed her lips together, clearly unhappy with my answer. "It's up to you. Just try not to draw attention to yourself." "Okay." Rebecca should be the center of attention tonight. Not she didn't finish her sentence, but her gaze spoke for her. Not an old woman in an old-fashioned dress. "I understand," I said, trying to keep my dignity. "I'm not going to interfere with the festivities." "Good," Lizzie nodded. "And one more thing, why don't you leave this album here?" She pointed to the family album I was still holding. "It looks so old, it doesn't fit the atmosphere." That was the last straw. I clutched the album tighter to my chest. "No, Lizzie, this album is part of my life, part of Neville's life, and I'm taking it with me." Her eyes narrowed. "You know, Rosalind, sometimes I think you're trying to ruin everything. On purpose, we invited you over as a courtesy, and you act like you have some kind of right in this house." "Rights?" I couldn't believe my ears. "I'm Neville's mother, Rebecca's grandmother. Of course, I have rights in this family." "Family?" Lizzie laughed cold and hard. "Listen, Rosalind, Neville and I are a family. Rebecca and Christopher are our family. And you're just an old woman who can't let go of the past." I recoiled like a blow. Her words hurt deeper than any physical pain. "How dare," I began, but Lizzie interrupted me. "No, how dare you spoil my daughter's party with your pathetic looks and your pretenses? Do you think Neville hasn't told me how you've tried to control him all his life? How you made him feel guilty for every sacrifice you made?" "That's not true," I exclaimed, feeling my voice shake. "I never, Mom." "Lizzie, what's going on here?" Neville appeared in the hallway, his face a look of alarm and annoyance. The guests in the living room had fallen silent, listening to our conversation. "Neville." Lizzie turned to her husband, her voice instantly pitiful. "I just asked your mom if she wanted to rest, and she started yelling at me." "What?" I gasped in indignation. "That's not true," she said. "I'm not part of your family." Neville shifted his gaze from me to Lizzie, and I was horrified to see him hesitate, wavering between his own mother and the woman who had just insulted me in the most brutal way possible. "Neville," I took a step toward my son. "You don't believe her, do you? You know me, I'm your mother." Lizzie crossed her arms across her chest, her posture expressing the certainty that Neville would take her side. "Ange was right, Mom." Neville sighed. "I asked you not to make a scene. This is Rebecca's party. If you can't behave appropriately, maybe you really should." I stared at him, not believing my ears. My son, my boy, the one I had raised alone, the one I had sacrificed everything for, was now standing in front of me and telling me to leave because I was defending my dignity. "Neville," my voice shook. "You don't understand, Lizzie. I understand, Mom, he interrupted me, his voice growing colder. You can't accept that I have my own life, my family. You're always trying to interfere, always trying to be the center of attention. That's not true. I felt tears running down my cheeks. I just want to be a part of your life, part of my grandchildren's lives. By now, the guests were coming out into the hallway, attracted by the noise. Among them, I saw Rebecca, whose face was a mixture of embarrassment and annoyance. What's going on? She asked, looking at her parents. Nothing, dear, Lizzie answered quickly. Your grandmother is a little tired and is going home. I'm not going home, I objected. I want to stay for my granddaughter's party. Neville stepped forward, his face contorted with anger. That's enough, Mother. You've ruined the evening. I'll call you a cab and you can go home now. I stared at him, stunned by his tone. He'd never spoken to me like that, so coldly, so contemptuously. Neville, I held out my hand to him. Please don't do this. Don't push me away. He pulled back, avoiding my touch. I'm not pushing you away. You're the one pushing everyone away with your behavior, your constant complaining, your self-pity, Neville. I couldn't believe he was saying that. How can you? How can I? He raised his voice. I've put up with your manipulation for years. Your attempts to make me feel guilty for being successful, for creating a life better than the one we had. You're not happy for me. You're jealous of me. His words were like knives stabbing into my heart. How could he think I was jealous of him? I was proud of him. Always. Had been every achievement, every success. Neville, it's not true. I tried to speak calmly despite my tears. I always wanted the best for you. I've always supported you. Supported? He laughed bitterly. You reminded me of every sacrifice you made, every hard day you went through for me. You used it to control me. No, I shook my head. I never wanted to control you. I just wanted to be a part of your life. But it's my life, Mom, Neville said, his voice quieter but no less cruel. It's mine, not yours. And I decide who is a part of it and who isn't. I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. Where did my son disappear to? That boy who hugged me when I was sad, who shared his dreams with me, who swore he would always take care of me when he grew up. You can't mean that, I whispered. I am your mother. I will always be a part of your life. Neville looked at me and I saw something frightening in his eyes, determination cold and unwavering. No, Mother, he said quietly. You're not part of our family anymore. Go away. The silence that followed those words was deafening. The guest froze, not knowing where to look. Lizzie stood with a look of ill-concealed triumph on her face. Rebecca looked shocked, but made no move to intervene. And I could feel something inside me finally dying. Love, hope, the belief that my son was still out there somewhere under the mask of this cold, calculating man. I straightened, wiping my tears with the back of my hand. If he wanted me to leave, I would, but not before I say what I have to say. Okay, Neville. My voice was quiet but firm. I'll leave, but before I do, I want you to hear me. He crossed his arms over his chest, his posture expressing impatience. I'm listening. I looked him straight in the eye. And in that moment, all the pain, the anger, the frustration, crystallized into something cold and sharp. Remember this day, I said, and my voice sounded strange, even to my own ears, low, vibrating with restrained power. It is now that Yah have buried not only your mother, but also your future. Neville blinked, his mask of self-assurance trembling for a moment. What do you mean? I didn't answer his question. Instead, I turned to Lizzie, whose face now expressed mild concern. You think you've achieved with everything, that your life is perfect, that you're invulnerable in your beautiful home with your expensive things and important friends. But remember, things can change in the blink of an eye. And when it does, remember this moment. Remember how you turned your back on the one person who loved you unconditionally. Lizzie laughed, but her laughter sounded nervous. God, Rosalind, you're really being dramatic. What are you going to do? Put a curse on us? I turned to her, and something in my gaze made her take a step back. It's not for me to curse you, Lizzie. You did it yourself by your pride, by your arrogance, by your contempt for those you consider beneath you. Then I looked at Neville again. I loved you more than anything in the world, gave you everything I had, but no, I see that it doesn't matter to you. Well, so be it. I'm leaving and I'm not coming back until you come to me and apologize. But mark my words, the day will come when you will regret today, and that day is closer than you think. I turned toward the door. But before I left, I cast one last glance at Rebecca. My granddaughter stood with her eyes downcast, clearly not wanting to meet my gaze. A new silver necklace glittered around her neck. "Rebecca," I said more softly, "I'm leaving you my gift. It's my grandmother's mirror. It's not as expensive as your mother's necklace, but it was dear to me. I hope someday you will realize its value." With those words, I walked out of the house without looking back. The night air was cool, and the stars shone brightly in the dark sky. I stood on the porch of the house I once thought was mine as well, and I felt a strange calmness. It was as if I was finally free of illusions, of hopes that were never meant to come true. The door behind me remained closed. No one came out after me. No one tried to stop me. My son, my family, they let me walk away alone into the night. I slowly descended the steps and followed the path to the gate. The cab they would undoubtedly call for me hadn't arrived yet, but I wasn't going to wait. I would walk, even if it wasn't a long way home. Each step removing me from Neville's house was both painful and liberating. Painful because I was leaving a piece of me heart behind. Liberating because I was finally accepting the truth I'd long refused to see. My son was no longer the man I'd known and loved. I walked down the quiet streets of Bowers, clutching the old family album, the only thing I'd taken from that house. Rare cars passed me, their headlights illuminating my figure for a moment, and then I was plunged back into the twilight. Was at that moment about what I had said to Neville and Lizzie, about my curse, as Lizzie had called it? Honestly, no. I didn't believe in curses or supernatural powers. My words were merely an expression of pain and anger, an attempt to retain some dignity in a situation where I had been robbed of everything. But something in the back of me mind told me that my words might prove prophetic. Not because of any mystical power, but simply because life hosts a strange way of balancing the scales. Those who are arrogant and cruel foresee the consequences of their actions sooner or later. Upon reaching my small home, I felt physically and emotionally exhausted. My legs ached from the long walk. My heart ached from the humiliation and pain I had experienced. I opened the door and entered the dark hallway, without turning on the light. I walked into the living room and sat down in my old armchair by the window. In the darkness, the contours of familiar objects seemed ghostly, unreal, or maybe whole life seemed unreal at that moment. Sitting there, I allowed myself what I had held back all the way home. I cried, not quiet, restrained tears, like it never house, but loud, uncontrollable sobs that shook my whole body. I mourned, not just tonight, but all the years I'd gradually lost my son. The years of hope and disappointment, expectation and neglect. How long did I sit like that? An hour, 2 hours, all night, I don't know. But at some point, the tears dried up, and I felt a strange numbness, as if a part of me had died that evening. I got up, turned on theolight, and looked at myself in the small mirror on the wall. An old woman with eyes swollen with tears stared back at me, but there was something new in those eyes. A determination, a hardness that hadn't been there before. I made my decision that night. No more attempts at a relationship. No more phone calls. No more unsolicited visits. If Neville decided that I was no longer part of his family, so be it. I would accept his decision, no matter how painful it was. But I also knew that I wouldn't just sit around and wait for him to call or apologize. I would start a new life, a life without the expectations and disappointments associated with my son and his family. I was 76 years old, but I could still find meaning and joy in life, even if that joy would no longer be tied to the role of mother and grandmother. I undressed, tossing mid-dress into a corner. I would never wear it again. I took a shower, washing away not only the physical grime after the long walk, but also, it seemed, the emotional grime of this evening. Then I made myself some tea and sat down at the small kitchen table. In the stillness of the night, the ticking of the old wall clock seemed especially loud. Each tick was another second of a new life, a life without Neville, Lizzie, Rebecca, and Christopher. I thought about the words I'd said to my son before I left. Remember this day. It is now that you have buried not only your mother but also your future. Were those words a prophecy or just an expression of pain? I didn't know, but something told me they might be more true than I thought at the time. It was getting light when I finally got into bed. As I fell asleep, I thought that perhaps this was the end of one chapter of my life. but the beginning of another, a chapter where I would live for myself, not for my ungrateful son and his family. And though the pain of his betrayal was still fresh and sharp, I felt a strange calm, as if the long struggle was finally over. And now I could rest. Even if that struggle hadn't ended the way I'd hoped it would. My last thought before sleep finally overcame me was that Neville and Lizzie might regret their choice, not because I wish them harm. No matter what, I still love my son, but because life has a strange way of teaching lessons to those who think they are above everyone and everything. My first morning without my family greeted me with silence. I woke up late. The sun was already high, its rationing through the tightly drawn curtains. I lay still for a few seconds trying to figure out why my chest felt so heavy. And then I remembered everything. The humiliating evening, Neville's cruel words, my walking out into the night. "You're not part of our family anymore. Leave." His words echoed in my head, causing almost physical pain. How could he? How could my son, my flesh and blood, do this to me? I forced myself to stand up. At my age, you can't let yourself lie in bed all day, even if you're heartbroken. My arms and legs moved as if on their own, performing usual morning rituals. Wash, dress, put the kettle on. Walking past the dresser in the living room, I stopped in front of the pictures. Neville as a child, Neville as a teenager, Neville with his wife and children. My whole life was here, captured in these pictures. I took on pictures. Neville and I at his graduation from college, he in his robe and Confederate gown, me next to him, so proud, grinning ear to ear. We both looked so happy. I stared at the picture for a long time, and then I resolutely put it face down. Then I did the same with the rest of the pictures. I couldn't bring myself to put them away, but it hurt too much to see them every day. The phone rang and my heart jumped. Was it Neville? Was he coming to his senses, wanting to apologize? I almost rushed to the phone. "Hello, Rosalind. It's Nora, Aunt Lizzie. We met yesterday at Rebecca's birthday party." I felt both disappointed and relieved. Not Neville, but not completely alone. "Yes, Nora, I remember. Hello. I was just wondering how you were yesterday. It was awful the way they treated you." Her words were like a balm to the wound. Someone else saw. Someone else realized how unfairly I'd been treated. "Thank you for your concern," I replied, fighting the lump in my throat. "I getting by." "Look," Nora continued. "I was thinking maybe we could get together, have some tea, talk. I'm in a similar situation myself with my daughter, and sometimes you just need someone to share it with." I agreed, marveling at how quickly life throws up new opportunities when old doors close. We agreed to meet the next day at Asmol Cafe in downtown Bowers. After talking to Nora, I felt a surge of energy. I needed to move on with my life. I wasn't going to let Neville and Lizzie break me. I decided to do something. Physical activity always helped me get my thoughts in order. As I dusted, sweeping the floor, I thought about what I had said yesterday. Remember this day. It is now that you have buried not only your mother but also your future. Did I really mean it? Did I wish my son misfortune? Honestly, in that moment, yes. I wanted him to feel at least some of the pain he'd caused me. I wanted him to understand what it was like to be rejected by the person closest to him. But now, in the light of a new day, motherly love, fortress, no matter what he did to me, he was still my son. Could I truly wish him harm? That same day, I decided to write a letter to Rebecca, not to Neville or Lizzie. I'd said all I wanted to say to them, but my granddaughter, she was just a teenager under the influence of her parents. Maybe we still had a chance at a relationship. "Dear Rebecca," I began, "I hope you'll read this letter, even if your parents are against it. I want you to know that I love you no matter what. Whatever happens between me and your parents shouldn't affect our relationship." I wrote for a long time, putting all my love and hope into the words. When I finished, I sealed the envelope and put it aside. "I'll send it tomorrow." I spent the evening in silence, leafing through old books, trying to distract myself from thoughts of my family. It was strange to realize that now I had no son or grandchildren, that I was truly alone. At 76, starting life anew is no easy task, but I was determined to do it. I've survived worse. I've survived the death of my husband. I've raised my son alone. I've overcome financial hardship. I could handle it. The next day, I met with Nora. She turned out to be a pleasant interlocutor, intelligent, attentive, with a sense of humor that helped her to bear her own family problems. We talked about our children, about disappointments, about hopes that didn't come true, about how hard it is to accept that your child didn't grow up the way you raised them. You know what the most frustrating part is? Nora said, stirring her tea. That they don't value our experience, our wisdom. They think we're old and stupid just because we don't understand their new technology, wear fancy clothes. I nodded, agreeing with her. We'd lived whole lives, seen and experienced things they have no idea about, but that doesn't mean anything to them. Nora sighed. Well, at least we have us. Two old hags who understand each other. We laughed, and for the first time in the last 2 days, I felt like I could breathe more freely. After my meeting with Nora, I sent an email to Rebecca and decided to take a walk around town. It was a clear, sunny day, and I didn't want to go back to an empty house. I walked slowly, watching the people around me. Young mothers with strollers, school, children hurrying home, couples holding hands. They all seemed so happy, so whole. Unlike me, a broken old woman with a broken heart. No, I pulled myself back. No, self-pity. You're stronger than this, Rosalind. And I was indeed stronger than that. Every day I forced myself to get up, to get dressed, to get out of the house. I signed up to volunteer at the local library, started seeing Nora more often, even joined a knitting group at the local senior center. Lizzie would have been amused given her comments about my homemade sweaters. The days were adding up into weeks. There was no word from Neville, no word from Rebecca Thor. Apparently, my letter either didn't get through or was intercepted by my parents, or worse, was read and ignored. I tried not to think about them, but I couldn't. Every morning, I woke up thinking maybe he'll call today. Every night, I fell asleep with disappointment. He didn't call. And then 3 weeks after that unfortunate dinner, I saw Neville. It was an accident. I was leaving the supermarket loaded down with grocery bags when I spotted him across street. He was standing by his car talking on his phone, and he looked different, tired, tense. Even from a distance, I could see the dark circles under his eyes, the nervous gestures. My heart beat faster. My son, my boy. Despite everything, I still loved him, still wanted to go over and hug him, ask him what was wrong, what I could do to help. But I didn't. Instead, I quickly turned in the opposite direction, trying to get away before he noticed me. I wasn't ready for this encounter. I wasn't ready to see the coldness and disgust in his eyes again. At home, I couldn't stop thinking about how Neville looked. Something was obviously wrong. He was always so neat and well-groomed, and today he seemed almost shabby, in trouble. And if so, what kind? It's none of your business. I reminded Miss Viss, he's made it clear that you're no longer a part of his life. But my motherly heart wasn't listening to reason. I was worried. The next day, Nora called me with unexpected news. Rosalind, you won't believe what I found out. Her voice sounded worried. Neville's in trouble at work. I froze, clutching the phone. What do you mean? My niece works at the same company as him. She told me there was some kind of scandal last week. Neville proposed a project that turned out to be a flop. The company lost a major client I slumped back in my chair, feeling my knees go weak. How serious is it? Serious enough. He still works there, but his reputation has taken a serious hit, and that doesn't seem to be his only problem. What else? I'm holding my breath. Well, it's more of a rumor, but word is he and Lizzie aren't doing so well. My sister saw them at their restaurant last week, and they were fighting right there in front of everyone. Lizzie even walked out, leaving him alone. I didn't know what to feel. On the one hand, some dark part of me felt satisfied. This was it. Retribution for the way they treated me. On the other hand, it pained me to think that my son was suffering. Thank you for telling me, I said to Nora, but I don't think there's anything I can do. He's made it clear he doesn't want to see me. I understand, Nora said softly. I just thought you should know. After that conversation, I couldn't find a place to be. I walked around the house trying to keep my hands busy and my mind occupied, but my thoughts kept coming back to Neville. What exactly had happened at his job? How serious were the problems with Lizzie? And I couldn't help but think about it. Did it have anything to do with my words that night? Remember this day. It is now that you have buried not only your mother but your future. Was this really some kind of prophecy? Did my words really have power? Don't be ridiculous. I pulled myself back. You're not some witch from a fairy tale. Your words can't affect reality. Still, the coincidence was strange. Just 3 weeks after my curse, Neville started having problems. First at work, then with his wife. What next? I remembered what Neville had looked like outside the supermarket. Tired, exhausted. Like he hadn't slept for several nights. It was so unlike him, always impeccable, always in control. Something had seriously disrupted his perfectly organized life. Part of me wanted to call him to offer help, support, but the other part, Peppered, that still bled from his cruel words, stopped me. He'd made his choice, let him live with the consequences. For the next few days, I tried not to think about Neville and his problems. I focused on my new life, volunteering at the library, seeing Nora knitting. Thoughts of my son wouldn't let me go. On Thursday, as I was walking back from the library, it started raining. Sudenial rain. I didn't bring an umbrella and was soaked to the skin by the time I got home. After changing into dry clothes and making myself a hot cup of tea, I sat by the window, watching the rain streaming down the glass. The bell rang, taking me by surprise. I wasn't expecting visitors, especially in this weather. When I opened the door, I froze with surprise. Rebecca, my granddaughter, stood on the doorstep, drenched from the rain, with a backpack over her shoulders. "Grandma," she said quietly, "can I come in?" I stepped back silently, letting her into the house. Rebecca looked depressed with dark circles under her eyes like her father's. "What's wrong?" I asked, helping her out of her wet jacket. "Do your parents know you're here?" Rebecca shook her head. "No, I ran away from home, where things are bad, Grandma." I sat her down on the couch and brought her a towel and a cup of hot tea. Rebecca was shivering, and not just from the cold. "Tell me," I asked gently, "what's going on?" She took a sip of tea, gathering her thoughts. "After that night, after you left, everything's gone wrong first. Dad lost an important client at work. Some project fell through and he almost got fired. Then Mom started fighting all the time. She says he's letting the family down, that this isn't why she married him." I listened, feeling the anxiety building up inside. This was worse than I thought. "What about you, Christopher?" Rebecca grinned bitterly. "We try to stay out of their fights. Christopher spends all his time at a friend's house or in his room. And I couldn't take it anymore, especially after I found your letter. You got it." I couldn't hide my surprise. "I thought your parents, my mom intercepted it." Rebecca nodded. "But I accidentally found it in her desk last week. I read it and I realized what a terrible thing we did to you. How could I just stand there and watch Dad kick you out? How could I not stand up for you?" Her eyes filled with tears. Andy hugged her, feeling my own heartbreak with pain and love. "You were a child in a difficult situation," I said. "Don't blame yourself, but it's worse now," Rebecca continued, wiping away her tears. "Dad, he's changed. He's nervous, irritable, always talking about bad luck, about some curse hanging over him. And yesterday I overheard him telling Mom that it all started after what you said the other night, that two had done something to him." I pulled away, shocked. "What, he really thinks that?" Rebecca nodded. "He said it started after she said, you buried not only your mother, but your future. She did something to me, Lizzie. It's not a coincidence." I couldn't believe my ears. Did Neville really believe that I had put some kind of curse on him? That my words, spoken in a moment of deep pain, had supernatural power? "That's absurd," I said firmly. "I'm not a witch, Rebecca. I can't curse people. I was just expressing my pain. What's happening to your father now is a coincidence or perhaps a consequence of his own actions." "I know." Rebecca looked beyond her years. "Buffy doesn't believe it. He's becoming obsessed with the idea and it scares me." I didn't know what to say. My son, always so rational, so practical, believing in a curse. It was so unlike him. "What else is going on?" I asked. "Besides problems at work and fighting with your mom?" Rebecca thought for a moment. "A lot of little things. His car broke down last week, then his wallet was stolen, and 3 days ago, he slipped on the wet office floor and sprained his ankle. Now he has to walk with a cane. A series of bad luck, one after another." Anyone would start looking for an explanation, and Neville found it in my words, in his guilt, which he didn't want to admit, but which was gnawing at him from the inside. "And now what?" I looked at my granddaughter. "What do you plan to do?" Rebecca lowered her eyes. "I don't know. I can't go home. Not now. It's too hard. Can I stay with you just for a couple days?" My heart squeezed with compassion. Of course, I couldn't refuse her. "Stay as long as you need to." I stroked her head like I'd done when she was little. "But we have to let your parents know where you are. They'll be worried." Rebecca nodded, though. She clearly wasn't thrilled with the idea. Okay, but can we not do it tonight? I'm not ready to talk to them. Okay, I agreed. I'll call them in the morning. I made Rebecca's bed in the guest room that had once been Neville's room. It was strange to see my granddaughter in the room where her father had once slept. A boy with dreams of a great future. A boy who loved his mother. It was late in the afternoon when Rebecca fell asleep, and I sat in the kitchen reflecting on the turn my life had taken. 3 weeks ago, I had been a lonely old woman, rejected by my own family. Now, my granddaughter was sleeping in the next room, and my son was apparently going through a major crisis. I couldn't help but reflect on my words that evening. Of course, I didn't believe I had actually cursed Neville, but part of me wondered, what if my pain and anger had somehow what if the universe had decided to restore balance by punishing someone who had hurt his mother? No, I shook my head. That's superstition. Neville created his own problems by his arrogance, his disregard for others, his desire to appear better than he is. Still, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Whatever the cause of his unhappiness, Neville was suffering. And no matter how much he hurt me, I didn't want that. I didn't want my son to be broken. Tomorrow, I decided, tomorrow, I'll call him. I'll tell him I have Rebecca, that she's safe, and maybe, we can find a way to fix what's broken between us. Exactly 1 week had passed since Rebecca showed up on my doorstep. 7 days filled with difficult conversions, tears, and the gradual rebuilding of our relationship. My granddaughter had revealed herself to me in a different way than I had known her before. Without the influence of Lizzie and Neville, she was a sensitive, intelligent girl with her own way of looking at the world. I called Neville day after Rebecca arrived as promised. The conversation was short and tense. He was both angry and concerned that his daughter had run away from home, but agreed that it was best for her to stay with me for a while until situation at home improved. She's safe, Neville, I assured him. I'll take care of her. Thank you, he replied after a pause, and I heard something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Tiredness, and maybe a touch of humility. He'd called every day since then to talk to Rebecca. Their conversations were short and, as far as I could tell, awkward. Rebecca didn't say much about what was going on at home, but from the snippets of phrases and her reactions to her father's calls, I could tell that things weren't getting any better. Nora, my new friend, became a frequent visitor to our house. She brought homemade baked goods, helped with the cooking, and entertained Rebecca with stories about Bowers and its people. Thanks to her and her connections in town, I learned news about Neville that he didn't share himself. I hear his company's making more layoffs, Nora said one day when Rebecca was at school, and they say he's at the top of the list for layoffs. I sighed, pouring tea into cups. It's not a rumor anymore. Rebecca said he's coming home later and looking worse. She's worried about him. And Lucy, Nora asked, adding sugar to her cup. Is she supportive of him? I shook my head. From the looks of it, no. Rebecca says they hardly talk to each other. Lizzie spends more time out of thy house than she does at home. Nora clucked her tongue. I've never understood that woman marrying a man and then leaving him as soon as the difficulties start. I didn't answer. Despite everything that had happened, I found it hard to judge Lizzie. Yes, she had been arrogant and cruel to me, but she was the mother of my grandchildren, and perhaps she had her own reasons for distancing herself from Neville. During this difficult time, that day, Rebecca's 7th day with me, she and I decided to bake an apple pie, her favorite treat from childhood. I taught her how to roll out the dough, slice the apples thin, and add the spices. She laughed when the flour got on her nose, and I saw in her the little girl who once loved to spend time with me. You know, Grandma, she said, stirring the stuffing. I haven't been as happy as I am these days at your place in a long time. I smiled, though my heart stabbed at the realization of how miserable she must have been at her parents' house. I'm glad you're here, dear. You can always come to me. You know that, don't you? She nodded, but her smile faded a little. I do know that. It's just I'm worried about Dad. He sounds worse every day, and yesterday. She stopped talking, biting her lip. What happened yesterday? I asked softly. He was crying, she said softly. I've never seen Daddy cry. Never. Even when Grandpa Roy died, he didn't cry. At least not in front of me. And yesterday, I heard him sobbing in his study. I froze, picturing Neville, my strong, always collected son, crying alone. What could have driven him to such a state? Rebecca, I chose my words carefully. Don't you think your father needs help? Professional help. Maybe. She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. I tried to tell my mom that, but she just brushed it off, said he was just going through a rough patch and needed to pull himself together. Typical Lizzie, denying the problem instead of trying to fix it. But I was starting to get seriously worried. What if Neville really needed help? What if he was on the verge of a breakdown? We finished the pie and put it in the oven. Rebecca went to her room to do her homework, and I stayed in the kitchen wondering what to do next. Maybe I should have called Neville, offered to help, despite everything that had happened between us. Before I could make a decision, the doorbell rang. It was sharp, insistent. When I opened the door, I froze in surprise. Neville stood in the doorstep. But he wasn't the Neville I knew. Confident, impeccably dressed, with a straight back and a proud head. This man looked as if his life was falling apart before his eyes. His face gaunt, his eyes inflamed, his clothes wrinkled, his cheeks unevenly shaved. He was leaning on a cane, probably because of the sprained ankle Rebecca had mentioned. Neville. I couldn't hide my surprise. What are you, Mom? He interrupted me, his voice sounding hocero, as if he'd been crying or screaming for a long time. In need to talk to you, please. I stepped back, letting him into the house. He was limping, leaning heavily on his cane, and he looked like every step was hurting him. Is Rebecca home? He asked, looking around. Yes, she's in her room doing her homework. Good, he nodded. I'd rather talk to you alone. I led him into the kitchen and motioned for him to sit down. He sank heavily into a chair, putting his cane beside him. Tug suggested, not knowing how to start the conversation. No, thank you. He rubbed his face with his hands. Mom, I need your help. Is it down across from him, waiting for him to continue? Neville looked like he was having trouble finding the words. You've probably heard from Rebecca that I'm problems, he said at last. Yeah, she mentioned that things weren't going well at work, I said carefully. Neville let out a short barking laugh that didn't have an ounce of mirth in it. Not everything is smooth. That's an understatement. I was fired, Mom, yesterday. After 15 years with the company, they just called me into the director's office and told me my services were no longer required. I couldn't hide my shock. Neville had always been successful in his career, constantly promoted, proud of his accomplishments. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. What happened? He shook his head, staring into the space in front of him. Everything started falling apart after that night. After what you said. First, I lost an important client because of a mistake I never would have made before. Then another. Then I blew a presentation to the board of directors, and all the while I felt like something was weighing on me, like a dark cloud hanging over my head. I listened without interrupting. He needed to talk. Anthon, the trouble with Lizzie started, he continued. She was always there when things were going well, but as soon as things got difficult, he paused, swallowing. She left, Mom, took Christopher, and went to her parents, said she couldn't live with a loser. I felt my heart clench. No matter how I felt about Lizzie, it was a cruel thing to do. Neville, that's not all. He interrupted me, a note of desperation in his voice. I saw a doctor yesterday. They found a problem with my heart. Nothing fatal, but it needs treatment. Expensive treatment. And now I have no job, no health insurance. He fell silent, looking at his hands on the table, hands that were visibly shaking. It all started after you said that, Mom, he said quietly. After you said I'd buried my future, and I can't help but think that this is Yorkers that you did something to me. I stared at him, not believing my ears. Did my rational, practical son really believe that I had put some mystical curse on him? Neville, I began softly, you can't be serious, can you? You don't believe in curses, in magic. You've always been so rational. I know, he nodded. I know how it sounds, but how else do you explain the fact that everything in my life started falling apart right after you said that? It can't just be a coincidence. I sighed, not knowing how to approach this conversation. What do you want from me, Neville? What do you want me to do? He looked up at me with a look of despair. Take it off the curse. Say you forgive him, that you take it back. I looked at my son, broken, scared, clinging to the superstitions he'd always ridiculed. Part of me wanted to just agree to say I'd break the curse if it would bring him relief, but the other part realized that would be wrong. It would only reinforce his belief. Thatha's problems were caused by some outside force rather than his own actions and decisions. Neville, I straightened up in my chair, choosing my words. I didn't put any curse on you. I'm not a witch. I'm not a sorceress. I'm just your mother, whom you hurt deeply. But your words, My words were an expression of pain, I said firmly. Pain that my only son, the one son I'd raised alone, the one I'd sacrificed everything for, had publicly disowned me, said I wasn't part of his family anymore. Neville lowered his eyes, clearly feeling uncomfortable at the reminder of his words. I was issuant had said that, but you did. I wasn't about to soften the blow. And not just that, you stood by and watched your wife humiliate me. You let her mock or past our life, and instead of protecting your mother, you joined her. I know. He shook his head. And I regret it. I really do, Mom. I was blinded. My status, my success. I wanted to live up to the image I'd created. And that, Neville, is the real cause of your problems, I said, looking him straight in the eye. Not some mythical curse, but what you've become. Arrogant, selfish, willing to turn your back on your mother to maintain your image as a successful man. He listened without interrupting, and I could see that my words were resonating, albeit painfully. You didn't lose your job because of factors, I continued. It was because you always put your own success before the team, because you thought you were better than everyone else. And when the problem started, no one was there to support you. Where did you? Rebecca told me. I explained about the way you talked about your coworkers, how you thought they were incompetent, not worthy of your level. Neville swallowed, not denying it. And Lizzie, I continued, feeling like I couldn't stop halfway through. She didn't leave you because of the curse. She left because your marriage had always been based on external success, on status. You were her trophy, a successful husband to brag about, and when that image crumbled, there was nothing left for her to love about you. He flinched as if struck by a blow, but didn't object. Even your health problems. I softened my tone, seeing how hurt he was. You've been ignoring symptoms for years, refusing regular checkups, working your ass off. You said yourself that doctors were for wimps. Neville sat with his head down, his shoulders slumped. He looked small, vulnerable, not at all like the confident man he was so proud of. So, help me, he asked quietly. I sighed. Neville, I can't break a curse that doesn't exist, but I can tell you the truth. You created your own problems, and only you can solve them. How? He looked up at me with a look of despair in his eyes. How do I fix it? I lost my job, my wife, my health. I have nothing left. You have a daughter who loves you no matter what, I reminded him gently. And you have time to rethink your life. But I'm not going to solve your problems. Neville, what do you mean? He looked confused. I won't give you money for treatment, I said bluntly. I won't call people I know to get you a job. I'm not going to offer you a place to live. You're a grown man, Neville. You chose your own path when you disowned me. Now you have to deal with the consequences. Mom, his voice trembled. Please, I apologize for everything. I've been a terrible son, I know, but I'll change. I swear. Just help me now when I feel so bad. I shook my head, feeling my heart break at his pleading. But I knew I had to stay firm. If I gave in now, nothing would change. He'd just go back to his old habits as soon as the crisis passed. No, Neville, you have to find your own way out. You have to get back on your feet. Sort out your own problems. Will you? You won't forgive me. He looked shocked. It's not about forgiveness, I tried to say calmly, though my insides were screaming with pain. It's about consequences. Every action has consequences, Neville. You can't just say sorry and expect everything to go back to normal. He wassaited for a long moment, digesting my words. Then he nodded slowly. I understand. You have every right to say no to me after everything I've done. This isn't revenge. I wanted him to understand. I'm not turning you down to punish you. I'm turning you down because I know the only way you can truly change is if you go through this ordeal yourself. No crutches, no support. It's the only way you can become the man I always hoped you'd be. And what kind of person did you always hope I would be? He asked bitterly. Honest, strong, capable of admitting his mistakes and correcting them, respectful of others, not just those who might be useful to him. I said quietly, I hoped you would become like your father. He was never ashamed of his roots, would never betray a loved one for status or money. Neville flinched as if my words had physically hurt him. Mentioning his father always hurt. He idolized the memory of Roy, though he remembered him vaguely. I understand, he said finally, rising from his chair. Thank you for your honesty, Mom. I'll find a way to deal with Thiessen, my own. He picked up his cane and walked slowly toward the exit. At the kitchen door, he stopped. Rebecca, can she stay with you until I'm back on my feet? I don't want her to see me like this. and I don't want her to go back to Lizzie's. It's not the best atmosphere. Of course, I nodded. Rebecca can always stay here he is, long as she wants. Thank you, he said quietly. You won't tell her, I stopped B. Yeah, I'll call her later when I'm more focused. Okay, I agreed. I wouldn't tell. He nodded and continued on his way to the front door. I followed him, watching him struggle with these simple movements. Each step seemed to hurt him, not just physically, but mentally. That at the front door, he turned around one last time. Mom, do you really believe I can fix this on my own, after everything I've ruined? I stared at him for a long time, at this broken man who had once been my proud, successful son, and I didn't know what to say. Part of me believed in him, believed that somewhere deep inside the stranger, the boy I had raised, was still alive. But another part doubted it. Too much had been destroyed, too far down the path he'd chosen. I don't know, Neville answered, honestly. It's up to you how much you really want to change. He nodded, accepting my answer. Goodbye, Mom, he said quietly, and walked out, closing the door carefully behind him. I stood in the hallway feeling strangely empty. There was no gloating that my words had been prophetic, no satisfaction that Neville had finally gotten what he deserved, only a deep, heavy sadness for what could have been, but never would be. Grandma. Rebecca's voice brought me out of my reverie. She was standing on the stairs, looking at me with concern. Is everything all right? I thought I heard Dad's voice. I turned to her, trying to look calm. No, honey. It was the mailman. He asked me if I knew where a certain Reed lived. I said I didn't know. Rebecca didn't quite seem to believe it, but she didn't insist. The pie's probably ready by now, she said. Shall we go check it out? Yeah, I smiled, trying not about Neville going nowhere with no money, no job, no family. Let's go kick on our pie. The kitchen smelled of apples and cinnamon. Such a homey, cozy smell. Rebecca pulled the pie out of the oven, perfectly golden crust, juice bubbling around the edges. It looks delicious, she marveled. Let's try it while it's hot. As I watched her cut the pie as she carefully placed the pieces on the plates, I felt a strange mix of love for this girl who had come back into my life so unexpectedly, and bitterness at the thought of her father leaving her. We sat down at the table and started eating pie. Rebecca talked about school and the new friends she had made at Bowers, and I listened half-heartedly, thinking about Neville. I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. I didn't know if he'd ever get out of the hole he'd put himself in. I didn't know if my grandchildren would ever forgive their father for the way he had treated me and them. All I knew was that I had made the right choice in refusing to help him, not out of revenge, not out of a desire to see him suffer, but out of an understanding that sometimes a person has to go through pain and trials in their own to truly change. And if Neville ever does change, if he does become a different person, well, then maybe we can start building some new relationships. Not the one we had before that died the night he disowned me, but maybe something new based on mutual respect and understanding. In the meantime, I'll live my life. I'll take care of Rebecca, support her, help her become a strong, independent woman. I'll see Nora. I'll work at the library. I'll work in the knitting circle. I will live the way I should have always lived, not as someone's mother or grandmother. Buta's Rosalind Barrow, a woman who has been through a lot and stood strong. And if somewhere out there in the world, my son is fighting his own demons, well, I wish him luck in that fight, but I will no longer be his shield. I won't be his lifeline. I won't be the one to pick up the pieces of his mistakes. That chapter of my life ended the night he said, "You're no longer part of our family." And a new one began today when I said, "I won't solve your problems." And in this new chapter, there was no room for the son who betrayed me, but there was plenty of room for the granddaughter who found her way back to me, for new friends, for new interests, for the new independent Rosalind.